Namrata was earlier with Philips as People and OD Manager and Strategist there. So thank you, Namrata, for joining us. We also have Chaitali Mukherjee, Country Manager for Right Management India. Chaitali is a strategy and talent management expert and also serves as the India Region Practice Leader for our Talent Assessment Center of Excellence. Her work experience spans across the areas of business and corporate strategy, individual, team and organization assessments, HR strategy, system design, OD and change management. Prior to joining Right Management, Chaitali worked with IBM Global Services and also Tata Consultancy Services, and has primarily worked there in the areas of transformation and change management. With this, I'd like to hand it over to Chaitali to start off with our webinar for today. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks to Hina and Vikram for initiating this conversation. A warm welcome to all our participants today. We've had amazing response over the past 2 days, and I'm glad that you all have been able to join today. As you can see, we'll quickly cover, in the first 15 minutes, I'll be trying to cover some of the challenges that we have captured, as well as some of the considerations. This is Right Management's point of view, basis the conversations that we have had with various clients. And thereafter, I will invite in Namrata to share the particular experience around the development of high potentials in case of Mahindra. So starting with the presentation, I'll actually go on to, just a minute. Vikram, we'll need someone to change the slides, please. So we start with the high potential survey. We start off by, there is a small survey that we had ran between October to February of this year, where we were trying to actually understand across 3 key stakeholder groups what is their experience around a high potential program. And the 3 stakeholder groups were the primary business sponsors, which could actually be anybody from the CEOs to the CHROs to the CLOs. Then we had the program managers who typically manage the entire intervention at the client's end or even at the consultant's end. And finally, participants who were actually identified as a high potential. We had run 3 different series of questions to actually capture data about their experience around high potential programs. And we have tried to segregate all that data around each of the 4 levels of discussion. So if we actually look at the mode of delivery was one of the questions that we had asked. And when we actually got into discussing what is it that impacts or what is the preferred mode of delivery when it comes to developing high potentials, it was very interestingly coaching and mentoring that came up as the most preferred mode of developing high potentials. However, when we were actually trying to correlate the data, you'll have to just give me a minute for a small technical glitch. The slides don't seem to be running. So on the mode of delivery, we had given multiple options to organizations to choose on what is the preferred mode of delivery, and coaching and mentoring got picked up as the preferred mode of delivery. You just have to give me a minute because I think there is a little bit of a glitch over here. From a talent bench creation perspective, because this is important for developing leadership archetypes. And finally, if we are actually running the program for developing talent bench, we will also need to run development interventions for high potentials across multiple levels, something that organizations call early potential, high potential, top potential. However, if your purpose is actually to build successes for key roles, then it becomes important to clarify the unique needs of each of those roles, what we call as success profiles, and individualized development for each of those special roles and special incumbents. Finally, if the purpose of this is to actually create an A team for a key project, the hypo development will have to have a very different requirement. Thus, purpose of the high potential development program becomes extremely important. Next comes business sponsorship. Again, this is a very, very important factor for running or deciding how I want to develop my high potentials. The first one being focus on outcome versus budget. So suppose we are trying to focus on the project whenever the business sponsorship is coming from key leaders, it becomes extremely important that they have the adequate sponsorship. And when the adequate sponsorship is available from the key leaders, they have more time by themselves and more patience, should I say, to see how it gives results in the long-term perspective. Similarly, if it is actually run at a local level, the need to prove output on a near term becomes very, very high. Hence, clarity of the purpose and ensuring everybody in the system knows why we are running this is extremely important. Many a times, organizations want to look at immediate outcomes, and the focus on budget becomes very important. While that's important, we will need to keep in mind that, like marketing, even talent development is a long-term initiative for an organization. A very interesting one, which is a key consideration, is what's in it for me as the organization. Now, the moment we talk about what's in it for me as an organization, we need to understand, before we start deciding how we will develop our leaders, what is the organization's agenda and mandate for the development? What am I trying to achieve through this intervention? Which gets clarified, of course, to the purpose, but most importantly, it also needs to be communicated to all the stakeholders, which is a very, very key factor. The next being what's in it for me as an individual. I, as a high potential, when I enter into a hypo development program, I have certain aspirations. Are we actually able to map the individual development mandate with the project mandate? In most organization cases, we have seen whenever they are running a hypo development program, it is skewed either towards individual development or towards business projects. It has to be a right balance between the two. Otherwise, it is I win, you lose. And hence, I think the project has to be designed such that both the aspects get taken care of. Talent maturity, knowledge, skill, or perspective. Now, this is again a very, very important factor. Who are we trying to develop and what are we trying to develop in them is a very important factor in deciding what should the hypo development program be about. Are we trying to develop knowledge? Are we trying to develop skills? Or are we trying to develop perspective? Because the way you can develop knowledge or skill, which could be a combination of classroom, versus the way you can develop perspective, which is a combination of experience, exposure, the mandate decides what will my process be. Group development versus individualized development. Many times organizations ask us this question, should the development be the same for everyone or should it be one-on-one? Like I clarified, the purpose will decide whether it has to be a group or an individualized development. If the development is for talent bench, you have certain specific aspects which you're trying to develop in a group of people. Versus if you're trying to develop people for specific roles or for a specific project, it will have to be more individualized. Normally, we say it has to be a balance between the two. And finally, one of the key considerations is also tailor-made development versus off-the-shelf development. This is personally one of my favorite considerations when I'm having conversations. Most of the times, organizations look at what others in the system, others in the competition or in the industry are doing, and they just want to continue doing that. But I always say that your strategy, business strategy, is different from the other. So if your strategy is different from the other, the same process and the same solutions will not apply to you. The development mandate has to be specific to your organization, and hence off-the-shelf development, at least for high potential potential talent, is not a good idea. Let's look at a few process considerations when making a hypo development program successful. Now, these are some of the key questions that come to mind. Are individuals nominated by managers to be part of the program, or they can self-nominate? Different organizations decide the process to be differently. The key over here is we have to keep in mind that everybody is looking for fairness from the process. And hence we have to ensure whatever we do, we communicate it well and we maintain that fairness and trust in the system. The other conversation that we had, in fact, a detailed one-hour conversation yesterday on whether to notify or not to notify. And like I said, out of the 4 strategies, two of the strategies is an in-between strategy, which is you decide who you want to notify and when you want to notify. But then at the end of the day, you absolutely have to ensure that whoever you notify, they know why they are part of the high potential and what does it mean from a give and take perspective. A very important aspect that needs to be discussed when designing hypo development programs is what is the role of senior managers. Now, senior managers typically play 4 discrete roles. They could play the role of a mentor, they could play the role of a coach, they could play the role of just being the manager, which is also a very important role, and then they could play the role of being the sponsor. It's very important to articulate for each of the senior managers involved what is their role and how will they play that. What are the key steps of selection process? Again, this is a very, very important one in building the commitment. Different organizations follow different process. And we, of course, had a very detailed conversation on our day 1 of webinar where we covered the entire process of identifying high potentials. But the reason to reiterate it over here today is the way you decide who your high potential is will also decide how you will develop them. One very important aspect that you need to keep in mind is you have to ensure every candidate experiences the same steps and the system is perceived to be fair. And finally, how are the high potentials tracked and monitored? A very important part of the high potential development process is continuous feedback, review against the project, and self-development goals. The review has to be not just whether they are achieving the business goals, but the review also has to be whether they are developing against their development goals. This is where the role of the program managers becomes extremely critical. And we like to call the program managers the Sutradhar because they are the ones who hold the reins of the entire program and ensure it becomes successful. So let's look at some of the key challenges organizations face around developing high potentials. This is a question that we usually get, and I also know most of the times when we are designing high potential programs, organizations stand up and ask us, how varied can the program be for high potential employees? I go with the response, how varied is the purpose of your intent of developing high potentials? If it's for talent bench, it will need to be a similar process for all with focus on individuals in small cohorts. If the focus is successors for key roles, it will need to be different for each role. Again, if the focus is knowledge enhancement or a specific perspective to be developed for different people, and it's for specific roles, it will have to be different for each one of them. But if it's a skill development for a group, it can be similar for the group. The key is actually in clarifying what you're developing for and how would you measure the success. The next one that people ask is, how much of my budget should I use for high potentials and how much for the rest? The answer to this question lies in how much of the business that you're expecting the high potentials to drive. Is the business betting on a major growth of the business on high potentials? In that case, it will have to be in proportion. Normally, organizations ask us, should it be a certain percentage of my profit after tax or a certain percentage of my revenue? We always say, if the organization is clear about what they're trying to drive, budget is the means, it's not the goal then. Can I cover high performers as well? Now, this is a question that we usually get. How will I manage expectations of my high performers? So should I also include them in a high potential development program? And we say you can never cover them under a specific development scheme. But mixing them with hypos is not a good idea. You can have a very different program for the high performers. Because if you put them in the same program, you will never be able to differentiate the two groups and will also not be able to measure the impact or contribution of each of these groups. High performers are best when you get them to focus on business as usual or sustaining the current business, and you could actually have development projects around this mandate. The expectation for both the groups needs to be clear and needs to be driven separately. Will a very specific program make the high potentials an elitist group? Like I shared even yesterday around notification, communication is going to be key. Ensuring that we run the program with enough bells and whistles, and by bells and whistles over here, I mean continuous monitoring and regular feedback. Have enough coaching and mentoring support, and clarify that high potential status is not a permanent position and you have communicated this to people, you can actually run it successfully. Finally, what are the right ways to develop high potentials? Is there an industry-specific solution? And this is a very interesting one. My response to that is one size fits only one. There can't be a similar solution cutting across all organizations in the industry. And this entire thing, my competitors are also doing this syndrome, is a very dangerous syndrome to get into. If you believe your business strategy is unique, the hypos who will deliver on that strategy will also have to be different, and hence the program outline will also have to be different. You actually can't look at benchmarks. You should much rather try to look at new age practices because there aren't industry best practices. And once we keep all of these aspects in mind, we are actually able to run it well and design a good program which fits my challenge. At this point, I would like to invite Namrata to share the work that they have done, and it's pretty phenomenal work that they have done, to share with all of us how they have managed the program. Over to you, Namrata.
Hi. Thank you, Chaitali. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So I represent Mahindra Group, and in particular in Mahindra, I'll be representing auto and farm sectors. Before I start, I'll take a minute to give you an overview of the group for those of you who are not familiar with the group. Last year, we ended around $16 billion as our total revenue, and we are into diverse business. So they say that we start with auto, which is the most famous, and you see it on the roads, the XUV, and now the SsangYong Rexton tractors. And then we go into IT. We also go into Club Mahindra. Some of you will be familiar with that. So this is what the whole group is about. Going forward, what is the group's achievement and where does the group stand today? We are number one UV vehicles in India, which means that we have more than half of the market share, and you see the products like XUV, Scorpio, Xylo, Bolero, and now Rexton, and also the other car products like Verito and others. Farm equipment, we are the number one world's tractor manufacturers by volume. That means in the whole world, the maximum number of tractors are produced and sold by Mahindra. We are not number one in revenue. We hope to be there soon. The closest rival being John Deere. And then the ones that some of you will be familiar with, this Club Mahindra. The other upcoming group company, which is Mahindra Finance, it is doing extremely well and one of the fastest growing companies in Mahindra. IT companies, we are talking about Mahindra Satyam and Tech Mahindra, and there's another IT company called Bristlecon, which is also on SAP. We joke about it internally that we are all present in all continents except Antarctica. And one day we hope to be there as well. Moving on, the changing times in automotive and Mahindra. When we started the whole group, and I'm talking way back to late 90s, some of you may have been born, some of you on the call may not have been born then. So late 90s is an era where Mahindra was associated with Jeeps and then also tractors. As we moved on, the fortune started turning in our favor with coming of Scorpio. And today we have so many vehicles. We have trucks, we have generators, we have backloaders, we work in irrigation, agriculture. And we also launched E2O, which is the first compact electrical vehicle after Reva. We took over Reva, and that's where we launched. So if you see the growth of the group, and I always talk about to most of the HR people in my team and otherwise, that till you don't have a business context, there's no point in doing talent management or any of the other functions. So this slide is slightly more important because we had the business context. We were growing, and we were growing more than we thought. And if we look at our leadership strategy and the talent strategy, there was bound to be a gap as we moved forward. Could we think far ahead? Could we look at how are we going to fill the gap going forward? Then we did a very nice exercise, and I'm very proud that we did this exercise. What we did was we ventured into past, present, and future employees, and we took 30% of the sample size. That means we did insighting with 30% of our present employees. And I don't mean by sending them a survey, I'm talking about inciting in focus group discussion. Yesterday I was telling somebody in my team that they completed the inciting in 45 minutes. I said good inciting would take more. You cannot complete 101 good inciting in 45 minutes. Why I'm telling all this? Because this will give you an idea about the amount of effort that will go in. Then we went back to engineering colleges and B schools. We recruit from IIMs and IITs and other such institutes. We went back and surveyed the students, what were they looking for in the organization. Then we went back to our past employees, and I'm not talking of exit interviews and other things. We did one-to-one phone calls with the employees that had left us in last 3 years. And we tried to understand what were the reasons. And the most astonishing fact that came in was that it all boiled down to career progression, that people want good careers. So the most common fact, there were other factors which were very important, but the most important factor that led to this was that we want career progression. We are looking to have good careers. What is the organization doing to provide them? Moving on, then we try to define a career management philosophy. We talk of employee value propositions, and one of the tenets in our employee value proposition is abundant learning opportunities. The second tenet is empowering environment. So what we said was opportunity to work in an environment that empowers them to learning opportunity so as to shape their own career destiny. Now, this could be just one nice statement which gets written on a board or maybe published or mailers sent. We said no, we would try to live this philosophy. And thus emerged something called Emerging Leaders Program, and here's when we partnered with Right Management to run it. The best feature of this program, or the best thing that I fell in love with the program when we were designing it, was the thing that it is democratic. Anybody within the eligibility criteria can apply without asking HR, without giving with the manager's recommendation, without doing anything. It was new in the manufacturing industry in an Indian company. Maybe it is not new to some of you, but it was new. And what happens when you don't qualify? Your results are not being shared. So it stays between two people and a computer. So nobody else knows whether you applied and you did not qualify. So first part, and when we were designing the thing, we said we'll design 3 career paths, and any individual, irrespective of the stream that you are in, can apply to any one of them. For example, we had an HR person applying to customer management part. In customer management, primarily sales and marketing. Operations is more about manufacturing, supply chain. Technology and product development is mainly R&D and sourcing, purchasing, sourcing, and other things. Right? So once we had done that, then we started the program design, and then we said what is so unique about the program. And when we were talking to a lot of industry experts, including Right Management, one of the things that came to us was that when people learn most when they are rotated and pulled out of their present role. So we said this whole thing is about 6 to 8 years. Once this is about 6 to 8 years, what we said, the first part, you will move. So as soon as you're selected, you move out of your current role. You can be within a function, which means if you are in, let's say, sales, you could stay in marketing, but you have to move from your current sales. The second role, one of these 3 roles has to be outside the function. That means a sales guy will go to manufacturing, and a manufacturing guy will come out and go to R&D, which really leads to what Chaitali was talking about is is the learning while on the job, or the exposures that she was talking about. The other thing which was very significant when we sat down and designed was the exit clause. Now we said that mobility was a given, right? You have to be mobile once you apply to the path. You cannot say, hey, I can't move out of Mumbai, or I want to be in Delhi. No, once you apply for this path, mobility is a given. So you would have to move out. And there's a joke that goes around in HR circles that it's easier to move a person from Mumbai to US, but Mumbai to Chennai, it takes a lot of effort. But we said that is the only part where you can apply. We said we would reward loyalty. So we talked about 3 years in Mahindra. The assessment was in two parts. First was screening, where we did a GMAT kind of an assessment on abilities and other things. And the second part was like a mini development center, but functional expertise was also assessed. Why we are saying functional expertise? Because an HR person who wants to apply to sales must go through sales assessment, and you'll be surprised that an HR person also qualified. So this is the kind of opportunity and platform which was not available in the organization and which came into being. The key part, and this is where I want to spend most of my time, the key part is development, and I think right management, in fact, if I were to say, they led us to making a good design out of the development program. Now what happened? There were three parts to this. One was on the job, and as I discussed earlier, there were rotations. Rotations out of your comfort zone, out of your comfort function, out of your comfort location. We still believe this was the thing that led to the biggest, what should I call it, development or learning for the individuals. Before we did this, we did something very interesting. We did career insighting. We asked them where do they want to get. We ran a lot of psychometric battery of tests, but we had a 2.5 to 3 hours of career insighting with 15 people who got selected in this. And I thought that was one of the key turning points. We also gave them coaches only for careers. That means you want to discuss where you're going, you're not able to go there, you're not able to think, you don't know what opportunities are there, you do not know your strengths and weakness, so you should look at career coaching. This was, so we started off very well, so to say, by saying this. The second part was exposure. In this exposure, again, we work out an action learning project. Now, when I used to see action learning projects on slides, I used to have a smirk, okay? So those are the projects which you allocate to people and you form CFTs and people don't come back. This was extremely different, and right management, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but right management added a lot of rigor and value to this part. We actually, this is, if you ask me what is the part that has been going very well, it's these action learning projects. They were run like a clockwork, which means all the 5 people out of 15, we divided them into 3 teams. 3 teams used to come together month after month, work on it, meet offline and deliver the business results. All the projects are in progress, and the results which we have been to say are immense. Immense in the sense, not only they work together, but they also solved very complex business problems. Something like a market share, something like increasing profitability, lowering the cost, all those problems which are very complex and sometimes which get lost, but we know these are the problems, they were getting solved. The second thing is the group coaching. So when they were doing action learning projects, there was a concept. We had 2 internal coaches for group of 5 people and 1 external coach. And after the project, the same day they had a project review, they would have a group coaching, which would be real. So the best part about group coaching was it was real time, it was focused, and it had a follow-up because the next month they'll again be meeting for the same action learning project. The second part, which is the study mission, which we are doing with Satyam, which is a group company. Now for a manufacturing, even in Mahindra Group, the leader do not have a planned understanding of another group, because you work in your business, in your group with your P&L, but to understand how other businesses work. So we actually put down how would they travel, what would their learnings be, who all they will meet and what they will learn, and what kind of reporting they'll apply back to their projects. So this was something, the second best thing after ALP. And also one of the things, when you became a leader or in the learning pool, in the leadership pool for the organization, you interact with Mahindra leaders. Now that gives you not only visibility but also learning. Today, if I am a talent, my interaction with leadership is not very structured, maybe a talent review or something. We put a structure, time and plan to this, where there was a lot of value which could be derived from leaders. Second is the leaders speak. For example, a chairman of a very different company, let's say a Bacardi or something, comes and talks to them about what is it that they want to do. How is it that leadership is applied in different industries, and what are the underlying principles which are very similar. This was there was also a lot of case studies that were given to them. There was a lot of webinars that we did with them. Interestingly, all of them, depending on their coaching need, were given a book, and there were book reviews that were held. And I have seen few of them meticulously reading a book which they would have never done if there was no coaching, if there was no action learning projects, and if there was no study mission or a leadership intervention. These tools, I'm again repeating, the exposure tools stand alone don't mean a thing. But when they come together as a package and are driven with rigor, which has been happening, they came back to give a very accelerated development to all these leaders. Third part is classroom learning, and we try to structure it in a way that first is self, and we partnered with, on the recommendation of Right Management, we partnered with organizations like Center for Creative Leadership, Aerowand for Innovation, and there was other things that we are partnering with ISB, IIM, and other things, so that they get good exposure to classroom learning. But I still stand by when I started that action learning projects was the key. I'm on to almost the last part of my slide. We started in 2011. It was very easy for us to do it every year. But we decided that the quality of inputs and the development that we need to give these 15 people has to be extremely focused, extremely rigorous, and should be followed very well. So we said we will not do ELP batch every year. We will do it every 2 years. So as to bring focus, we are going with the second batch in August. And hopefully, now there's a word of mouth in the organization. For example, people come back and tell us, hey, how do I get into ELP? I get like on an average 10-15 queries in a month. When are you rolling out next ELP program? So, in fact, I was filling my goal sheet today for performance appraisal, and one of the things was qualitative assessment. And I was so happy to leave it at that by the senior leadership team, because I know that the word of mouth has played so much in our favor, because we have authentically done real development and not some development and sending them to a training program or giving them a coach. We tied up in a bunch and came back with it. I see a lot of pride these 15 people carry in being an ELP. So that is all. I'm done. Chaitali, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Namrata. I would like to add at this stage, the reason why we chose to actually partner with Mahindra on this entire conversation, even we take a lot of pride in the way it has, so there are two parts to it. One is the internal sponsor, and the other is the facilitator, which is a firm like ours. You need a lot of teeth inside the system to actually manage it to the extent and provide that necessary teeth to the consultants and empowerment to actually drive it to give these results. So yeah, absolutely. And we have a lot of questions already. So Tuhina, if you can just check out the questions and let us know.
Thank you, Chaitali. So thank you, Namrata, for sharing the Mahindra story. The first question that is coming is for Chaitali. How would you differentiate between high performers and high potentials? And isn't high performance a mandatory requirement for being a high potential?
Excellent question. In fact, this is a conversation that we usually have with literally every organization that we are working with. What is the difference between a high performer and a high potential? So we always say, and aren't they the same? So you would have seen multiple ways in which high potential gets defined. Yeah, high performance is one of the most important aspects that decides whether the person is a high potential or not. Yet, when high potential is actually measured, so we say potential is the extent of capacity that the individual has to go to any extent from a performance perspective. When I'm talking about performance is in consonance to a role, and potential is in relation to the person.
a high potential employee cannot necessarily be a high performer in all roles, because there are some inherent strengths that that person brings, and there are some inherent areas of development also that person brings. And hence, different situations get to see a different potential of the individual. The second difference that we see between a high performer and high potential is, like I said, performance is for the role. Many a times, high performers are picked up and pushed to a larger role. If they are not ready from a perspective know-how, also from a knowledge know-how, they might fail. Their potential is not adequate for that role, and hence their performance also gets depleted. So normally we always say, measure performance separately, which is through a sound performance management system. Measure potential separately, and potential is the innate ability of that individual to do variety of things. And potential can be measured either on competencies, either on leadership archetypes. The dependence is on for what are you measuring the potential. So yeah, the first filtration usually in organizations happen around performance, but whenever organizations are doing a journey on identifying high pods, we say spread the net a little wider. Let more fishes come into the catch, and you will always come to know some of your high performers are not your high potentials, and some of your high potentials may not be at their best performance. I hope this answers it.
Thank you, Chitali. The other question is, in today's scenario of budget freeze, what are the different cost-effective interventions that can be used for development of high potentials? So, Namrata, would you like to answer this?
When we started doing this program, we said that we will go with X budget. But all this development, because of the rigor that we drove, we only ended up spending, I think, 40% less of what we had budgeted for. So, action learning projects don't need a budget. You need to make a good schedule, follow it rigorously. Internal coaches don't need a budget. Meeting other industry leaders don't need a budget. Study missions don't need a budget, except for travel budget perhaps. So the only budget intensive thing is a classroom training that you do and an external coach. If you can drive the same rigor that an external partner would bring for you, which becomes sometimes difficult because of the organization scenarios and other things, I think a low budget development with a high impact is the key, and it is always possible. And I repeat what I said, action learning projects are the most effective way of developing, provided the structure and the rigor is built and the quality of projects chosen is good. So the last if that I would like to say is the organization sponsorship. If your organization decides to sponsor this program, then you can do with even a lower budget.
Thank you, Namrata.
Does it answer, Chitali? You want?
Yeah, absolutely. I think bang on. Absolutely.
We have another question here. So, as per the 70-20-10 rule of learning and development, which areas should be of more focus and can give maximum ROI in development of high potentials, whether it's on the job, coaching, networking, social or classroom interventions?
So I'll try and respond to this one. It's a very, very good question, because normally whenever you go and have conversations with organizations, they ask about the 70-20-10 or 50-25-25 between education, exposure and experience. I go back to where I started off. What is the purpose of your development? If the purpose of your development is actually to build talent bench, in that case you're actually trying to, when you're trying to build talent bench, you will try and build specific skills at a certain level or across multiple levels. In that case, things like ELPs, things like study mission, even a combination of education and experience is very important. If you're actually trying to develop successors for key roles, where you're actually trying to build a completely different perspective. So I say development either in knowledge, either in skill or in perspective. So if the development is around perspective, it needs more individualized intervention, and those are the places where you might need one-on-one coaching backed with something else out of education and experience. So I really think ROI around, a development kind is not important. ROI on the development mandate is very important. And the ROI has to be predefined before we actually start walking on the journey, so that we also know what is it that we are trying to drive.
And also ROI, Chaitali, just to add to what you're saying, I think ROI is not only in terms of the leaders that you'll be building, it's also in the discretionary effort that they'll put in. Right? It is more in the effort that we'll put in when you develop a person vis-a-vis when you don't invest in developing leaders.
Thank you for that. The next question is for you, Namrata. How did Mahindra manage work getting impacted as a result of immediate rotation of people applying for the program, and who was managing these rotations?
This was the biggest challenge, and I really like the question a lot. So, 4 things that came to our rescue. First is that there was a sponsorship. That was a complete buy-in by the... So when we launched it, we presented in the communication to top 150 leaders and ensured their buy-in was there when we launched it. So once the leadership team had bought in, that was the first. The second was that we identified roles in each function where a high potential leader could move, which means that we identified this role is a ELP role, this role is not an ELP role. And once we identified the movement, now we had from different functions. So one of the things that we tried to do as a first cut was that we moved one person into an ELP slot made vacant by another ELP. That was not always possible. That was possible 30% of the time. That was the second thing. The third thing that we did was we mapped all the vacancies in the organization and where an ELP would like to fit, or is it ELP specific. That was the third thing. And fourth thing we did is we went back to the drawing board with the talent strategy and strategy of the organization and went back on manpower planning and said what kind of roles are missing in the organization that will take us to the next orbit. And we sat down with everybody, created the roles in the same manpower planning budget. One of the key things to success is we neither ask for extra positions nor ask for extra manpower and managed to do that. It was not all cakewalk. We had to sit down with few head of the departments and senior leaders once, sometimes more than once, and very rarely the central talent management team had to escalate anything that this is not happening, because we were not in a hurry to launch the program. We launched it with a buy-in of, before we went into communication meet, with a buy-in of 60 people, went back, took their feedback, went back. Until the buy-in was ensured, then it was smooth. After that, even today, I sit on their performance appraisals and promotion, so that by the virtue of movement and learning, nobody is losing out. So we monitor that. Let's say I transferred you out of your comfort zone. If there's a sharp decrease in your performance rating, can I have a look at that? Can I have a reason for that? So this is all monitored centrally by the talent management team. Does that answer that question? I hope it does.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we have one more question. Is can we have a talent pool at every employee level? What the question is more directed is that, suppose you have a set of 15 employees and they are from different levels, across senior management, junior management. So wouldn't the development plan be different for each level?
So I'll try and take this question. Number one, can we have a talent pool at every employee level? Brilliant question. Actually, when you're trying to develop talent bench or a talent pipeline, you ideally do it at different levels. So somewhere in my presentation, I had made a reference to something called early potential, high potential, and top potential, which in itself says what is it that you're trying to do at each level. And when you're doing something like an early potential, high potential, top potential, which is at different levels, you're clearly trying to drive different things at each level. So for instance, at an early potential level, which is, people who are just getting into management responsibilities, and you want these people to start heading large task force, you will actually build different kind of capabilities in them. Whilst at the top management level, it would be, how do you stop looking at business as a silos, functions as silos, and start looking at SBUs altogether, end to end. So what you will do from a development perspective at that level will be very, very different. So yeah, you're right on saying that that when you're trying to create these programs, it's a better idea to have the entire audience from a similar level, so that you're able to have the same mandate of development for that group, and you run different programs at different levels.
Thank you, Chitali. So we have one more question, which is how much is e-learning and classroom training required for development of high potentials? Namrata, would you like to take that?
I think I answered it partially earlier. I said that classroom training is required, but not the highest priority. Because sometimes if there's a real knowledge gap, then you need to supplement it by classroom training. But I am a big fan of e-learning and webinars that we do. So they are equally good mode of learning, but I would peg them at number 3 or number 4.
So just add to what Namrata just said around e-learning and classroom training.
Yeah,
Whenever you're trying to, the development is around either knowledge or skill or perspective. So if it is a knowledge, a classroom training becomes very, very important. Also, if it is a particular skill enhancement, which is when you actually look at education and you look at e-learning and classroom. So I completely agree with what Namrata said at number 3 or number 4, if you're actually doing a very holistic development. If you're developing, first time people are going to an intervention and you see after an assessment there is a skill gap, then you might actually do a little bit of education. You might have a larger thrust on education in that case.
Namrata?
Yeah,
Any?
I agree.
Sure. Thank you. So one more question that's come for you is, can you share an example of an action learning project which was run at Mahindra?
Share 3 action learning projects. So with 15 people, we did 3 action learning projects. Let's say cost group, because that is more generic in nature. As you know, we are in the business of selling vehicles, that means XUVs and tractors. So one of the things that we struggled with last year is the market share in tractors. And this group was given a mandate of 5 states and increasing a market share. Now, other people in sales are also working on increasing the market share. They are doing it as their regular job. So they have to come up with something different. And not only they come up with something different, they have to implement this and show positive results in one state out of those 5 that they made plans for. And this is one of the direct impact projects. The other was to improve the cost conversion ratio in transmission. Transmission is usually in a car is a brake and gearbox and clutch. So to improve the cost conversion ratio in transmission. But let me talk a little bit about the first project where we partnered. All the projects, as you know, we partnered with Right Management, but this particular project went extremely well because the plan that they came up was robust, and after they come up with plan, they present to the chief executive of that business, and chief executive gives a feedback upon which they start implementing the plan. So I think what I liked about the action learning, it was not something, like a strategy team, you design something in thin air, but you also implement and show the robustness of the plan that you designed and it worked. Does that answer, Tuhina, is that fine?
Yes. So we have one more last question that we will be taking now, and we'll try to revert to the other questions separately. So how do you review all action learning projects, as each action learning project would be unique from the other?
So, Namrata, I'll try to take a first take on this, and it takes me back when we were trying to define the metrics, even in case of Mahindra, for action learning projects. So, number one, when you think of reviewing action learning projects, it should not be done reactively, it should be done proactively. And the proactive metrics has to be created, and the metrics gets created around the purpose. And there are two innate purposes that you try to achieve from any development intervention. One is the business impact and the other is the people development impact. So say for instance, if I take Mahindra as an example, we had identified every project. So there were close to 7 to 8 projects that got identified, and then we actually prioritized 3. So for us, even to get into that prioritization activity, we have actually defined multiple parameters on which each of the projects will get evaluated. And that parameter of evaluating each of them has to be well thought through. And then there were parameters also to identify the development opportunity in each of the projects. And on the basis of that, entire metrics that got created, each project got evaluated. And at continuous, instances at regular intervals, we continue to use that metrics to evaluate the performance of each of the projects and the movement of individuals from a development perspective.
Second part of the question, right? Tuhina?
Yes, Namrata?
Is there another part of this question?
No, so this is basically that, since each action learning project is unique in itself, how would you review the... Yeah.
So as Chaitali has added most of it, so we had 15 people, we made 3 action learning projects, and we put customer management, technology management and manufacturing operations people intermingled in all these 3 projects. These projects were very different. For example, one project was, as I said earlier, was on customer sales, the other project was on manufacturing, and the third project was on R&D. But the teams that were working were not from these core functions. So that means you get a holistic leader, you need to learn about R&D while you are in sales. When you are in manufacturing, you need to learn about the sales. So these projects were very unique in nature. There was no commonality at all in these 3 projects. So that should answer all the question, or the parts of this question.
Thank you, Namrata. So with this, we end the Q&A session for today, and we come to the end of our webinar presentation on developing high potentials and understanding challenges around this. I'd like to thank both of our facilitators for today, Namrata and Chaitali, and I think it was really great to hear your side in terms of how this process can be demystified for a lot of us. With this, I'd pass on the conversation on to Vikram to please close the session, and I do hope that the conversation for all the participants today was interesting. We really do look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our last and final webinar, which is on measuring ROI of high potential development programs. That should be an interesting conversation because that's I think on top of the mind of most organizations when they think of hyper development. What is the final output that we and outcome that we receive? So on to you, Vikram.
Sure. Thank you, Tuhina. And thank you to both our panelists, Chaitali and Namrata. It was a very, very exciting and enriching presentation. And I hope all of us watching the webinar also gained a lot from your experiences. And as Tuhina mentioned, tomorrow we'll be looking at the last piece of the high potential management puzzle, which is measuring the ROI. We again have 2 very highly experienced speakers presiding the session, and I hope that you have already blocked your time for tomorrow. So I hope to see you all of you tomorrow. Thank you so much.